The quiet winter test in Barcelona was supposed to be a low-key shakedown, just teams gathering mileage, checking systems, and easing into Formula One's most radical regulation reset in decades. But instead, it became the stage for something extraordinary. Red Bull, for the first time in its modern history, rolled out its own in-house power unit with Ford backing, and at the center of it all stood Max Verstappen, clocking an astonishing number of laps and leaving the garage buzzing with emotion. While rivals quietly collected data, Verstappen described Red Bull's start as hitting the ground running, a phrase that immediately raised eyebrows across the paddock. Was this simply early optimism? Or has Red Bull quietly solved one of the biggest technical challenges in F1 history faster than anyone expected? If you want deep analysis, hidden implications, and what this really means for the 2026 title fight, make sure you subscribe now, because this season could change Formula One forever. The Barcelona shakedown was never meant to deliver headlines. Officially, it was simply a mileage exercise, a quiet warm-up before the true pre-season testing storm. But behind closed garage doors, something far more important was unfolding. For Red Bull, this was not just about shaking down a new chassis. This was the birth of an entirely new power era. For the first time in modern Formula One, Red Bull rolled out its own in-house power unit, the Red Bull Powertrains Ford engine, a project years in the making, carrying enormous risk and even bigger ambition. And at the heart of this historic moment stood Max Verstappen. The four-time world champion's 118 laps on the final day weren't just impressive in volume. They were strategic, emotional, and deeply revealing. In Formula One, reliability is the first true performance indicator of any new engine. Speed can be hidden, power modes can be turned down, lap times can deceive, but sustained mileage without major technical drama, that tells the real story. Historically, new power unit manufacturers suffer painful beginnings, overheating systems, electrical failures, energy recovery problems, endless time spent behind garage doors while engineers scramble for fixes. Yet Red Bull's RB22 circulated relentlessly, and that alone sent shockwaves through the paddock. Verstappen described those laps as key, a word that holds enormous weight coming from a driver known for brutally honest feedback. It suggests Red Bull weren't just ticking boxes, they were learning fast, understanding how this brand new engine behaves under load, testing different setups, exploring energy deployment strategies. And perhaps most telling of all, the emotional reaction inside the garage. Verstappen openly admitted there were emotional faces among the Red Bull engineers. That kind of response doesn't come from simply completing a normal test day. It comes when a long-term project finally proves it works in reality, not just in simulations. It strongly implies that Red Bull themselves may have been cautiously nervous about this first outing, and instead, they were rewarded. However, Verstappen was careful not to oversell it. He repeatedly emphasized that everything remains a work in progress. The engine is still complex. The learning curve is steep. Setup windows are narrow under the new 2026 regulations. But the key phrase he used, "We've hit the ground running," is incredibly significant. In F1 terms, that means Red Bull are not starting behind. And that changes everything. Before this shakedown, many insiders quietly expected Red Bull powertrains to struggle early. Building an engine from scratch is one of the hardest tasks in motorsport. Even with Ford's backing, going up against giants like Mercedes, who mastered the hybrid era in 2014, seemed almost impossible. Yet early evidence suggests Red Bull may have closed that gap far faster than predicted. But it wasn't a perfect week. New teammate Isaac Hadjar suffered a crash that disrupted running. Weather conditions limited early laps. Verstappen himself was unwell during part of the test. Red Bull only truly found their rhythm on Friday, which makes the volume of laps even more impressive. In just one focused day, Red Bull gathered huge amounts of data, probably more valuable than 3 cautious days spread across the week. Now, let's compare this with Mercedes. While Red Bull was celebrating emotional milestones, Mercedes were quietly doing what they do best, accumulating relentless mileage. They topped the lap count across the entire shakedown. Teenage prodigy Andrea Kimi Antonelli even completed a full race simulation, something no team attempts unless they are extremely confident in reliability. George Russell emerged looking relaxed and optimistic. He described the Mercedes as stable, smooth, and, crucially, free of porpoising, a nightmare issue that plagued them after the 2022 regulation change. This suggests Mercedes have learned from past mistakes. And history tells us something else too. Whenever engine regulations change, Mercedes usually come out on top. Their dominance from 2014 onwards wasn't an accident. It was built on early technical brilliance. That's why many in the paddock already see them as favourites for 2026. Yet Russell made an interesting comment. He admitted some competitors' power units were impressive and surprising. That's a subtle but powerful hint. It suggests the new suppliers, Red Bull powertrains and Audi, are not struggling as many predicted. And Red Bull, in particular, appear far more competitive than expected. This sets up a fascinating scenario. Instead of one team dominating the new era, we may be heading into a genuine multi-team battle. Mercedes with their proven engineering excellence, Red Bull with bold innovation, and Verstappen in his prime. Ferrari developing quietly in the background. Audi preparing for long-term disruption. But there's also a warning hidden in all of this optimism. Shakedowns are deceptive. Teams run conservative engine modes. They hide true performance. They prioritise durability over speed. Red Bull's lap times of 1 minute 17.586 seconds means almost nothing in real terms. What matters is what happens under race conditions. Hot temperatures, long stints, full power deployment, aggressive energy recovery. New engines often show strength early only to reveal weaknesses later. Cooling issues might emerge in Bahrain's heat. Electrical systems might struggle under sustained load. Development pace could fall behind giants like Mercedes, who have decades of engine experience. So while Red Bull's start is incredibly encouraging, it is not yet a guarantee of dominance. But one thing is now clear. Red Bull are not in crisis. They are not scrambling. They are not desperately catching up. Instead, they have entered the 2026 era firmly in the fight. Team principal Laurent Mekies reinforced this narrative, calling the first runs with their own power unit a very special moment. He praised the engineers at Milton Keynes for delivering a functioning, reliable engine right out of the box, something that should never be taken for granted. Yet even he acknowledged the size of the challenge ahead. The journey has only just begun. And this is where Verstappen's rapid adaptation becomes truly important. New regulations often expose drivers who struggle with unfamiliar characteristics. Energy management, braking behavior, torque delivery, hybrid systems. But Verstappen already sounds comfortable, confident, engaged in the development process. When a driver of his caliber feels positive this early, it usually means the foundations are strong. And that should worry Red Bull's rivals. Because if Red Bull can combine a competitive new engine with Verstappen's relentless performance, the 2026 season could become an all-out war rather than a Mercedes walkover. Instead of a reset-handing advantage to one powerhouse, we may be witnessing the birth of the most competitive regulation era in modern Formula One. So the big question remains, has Red Bull truly cracked the 2026 engine formula earlier than expected? Or is Mercedes simply waiting to unleash their real performance? And more importantly, could this be the start of the closest Formula One era we've seen in decades? Let me know your predictions in the comments below.